Karoline Leavitt shuts down. Jimmy Kimmel's liberal lies. Final argument leaves him speechless. The studio lights were bright, casting a cold glow on the set, in front of the cameras. Karoline Leavitt adjusted her microphone, her face hardening into a practiced mask of calm confidence. She was here to defend Donald Trump, her boss, her leader, a man who had defied all odds and reshaped the political landscape. On the opposite side of the stage, Jimmy Kimmel sat behind a sleek desk, wearing his usual sarcastic grin, ready for another round of cutting humor. This wasn't just another late-night comedy show. This was an arena where political ideas collided. And tonight, it would be no different. Welcome back to Jimmy Kimmel Live, Kimmel started, his voice laced with the usual mockery. Tonight, we've got Karoline Leavitt, one of Trump's most outspoken defenders. Let's see if she can explain why the art of the deal is costing us billions and making every country hate us. Karoline's lips curled into a tight smile as the applause from the live audience died down. This was the part of her job she loathed most, the mockery, the jabs, the constant undermining of everything she stood for. But tonight, she wasn't just going to take it. Tonight, she was going to turn the tables. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "I'm here to talk about something that's actually affecting real Americans. While you're out there making jokes, people in the heartland are struggling, and they want solutions." Kimmel's grin widened. "Oh, I'm sure they're really concerned about tariffs and border security while they're watching Netflix and eating avocado toast." The audience laughed, and Karoline could feel the heat of their eyes on her, sensing the wave of mockery rolling toward her. But she held her ground, her posture perfect, her eyes never wavering from Kimmel. "You can laugh all you want, Jimmy," Karoline continued, her tone cool and composed. "But the reality is, President Trump has been doing more for the American people than any of your Hollywood elites ever will. The world might not like it, but they need us. You might find it funny, but countries are scrambling to make deals with the U.S. because we hold the power, and we don't back down." Kimmel leaned forward, his fingers drumming on the desk. "Oh, please. Let's not pretend Trump's trade wars didn't make things worse. You don't just get to slap tariffs on China and think the world's going to say thank you for that. Tariffs are a tool," Karoline shot back, her voice steady but rising in intensity. "They're not just a punishment, they're leverage. The same leverage you'd use if you were trying to negotiate with a stubborn partner, and it's working. The world's starting to realize they can't just ignore us." Kimmel let out an exaggerated sigh. "Well, if we're talking about leverage, maybe we should discuss how you're trying to leverage the American people's patience." "Huh. $6 trillion lost in 1 week. Yeah, that's some great leverage you've got there." Karoline felt the rush of irritation flood through her, but she kept her expression neutral. She knew this was coming. She was prepared for it. $6 trillion, she scoffed. "That's the kind of misinformation you peddle. It's not the numbers that matter, it's the long-term goals. Trump's plan isn't just about temporary wins. He's playing a game that requires vision, not just immediate results." Vision. Kimmel raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you call it? Because I call it a crash course in how to turn an economy upside down while blaming everyone else." The audience roared with laughter again, but Karoline remained unfazed. She wasn't here to entertain. She was here to win, to show that the world had misunderstood Trump's strategy. She could feel her own heartbeat quickening, but her face stayed impassive, her voice measured. "Look at the facts," she said, leaning forward slightly. Under Trump, unemployment was at its lowest in decades. Wages were rising. Jobs were coming back. All the while, the world was benefiting from our economy, even if they didn't want to admit it. Kimmel scoffed. "Right, making America great again. By making the rest of the world hate us, a perfect plan. Or maybe you'd call it the art of the deal." Karoline narrowed her eyes, her jaw tight. The jabs were relentless, but she wasn't going to back down. It's easy to mock success, Jimmy. It's easy to throw stones from a comfortable position. But out there, in the real world, people are waking up. They're realizing that we need to stand up for ourselves. And guess what? The world is waking up to it, too. Oh, I'm sure they are, Kimmel replied sarcastically. Because who wouldn't want to sign a trade deal with a country that's alienating its allies and turning everyone against us? The tension in the room was palpable now. Karoline could feel the sting of Kimmel's words, but she wouldn't let him win. Not here, not tonight. She had come for a reason. She wasn't just another talking head. She was here to challenge the narrative. Let me tell you something. Jimmy, Karoline said, her voice low and cutting through the laughter that had just died down. The world doesn't get to decide who leads. The American people do, and they chose Trump. He wasn't elected to be popular. He was elected to get things done. And no matter how much you try to tear him down, no matter how much you mock him, the results speak for themselves. Kimmel sat back in his chair, a skeptical smirk tugging at his lips. Oh, results. Huh. Well, when the results are more tariffs, more trade wars, and a $6 trillion loss, maybe it's time to rethink the plan. That's where you're wrong, Karoline snapped. You keep focusing on the short-term losses, but you're missing the bigger picture. The world will come to terms with Trump's vision, just as they always do. They can either adapt or get left behind. Kimmel shook his head, clearly amused. Oh, I'm sure they will. I mean, who wouldn't want to follow the man who thought tariffs were a game of bingo? Karoline let out a sharp breath. She knew this wasn't going to be an easy battle, but it was one she was willing to fight. For too long. People like Kimmel had ridiculed Trump and everything he stood for, but she wouldn't let them diminish the accomplishments of a man who had changed the course of history. The camera zoomed in on her face, capturing the determination in her eyes as she stared at Kimmel. This was more than just a TV appearance. This was a battle for the soul of the nation. The show continued. But for Karoline, it was clear this was only the beginning. The war of words had only just started, and the stakes were higher than ever. The heat in the studio seemed to intensify, the atmosphere thick with an unspoken challenge. Karoline Leavitt leaned forward, the lights overhead casting long shadows on her face, sharpening her features as if to punctuate her every word. She could feel the weight of Kimmel's mocking gaze, but she was done playing defense. Now, it was time to play offense. Let's get something straight. Jimmy, she said, her voice low but brimming with conviction. This isn't about a game of bingo or making jokes about tariffs. This is about the future of America. It's about ensuring that we remain a global power. And, yes, sometimes tough decisions need to be made. But that's what Trump does. He makes the tough calls. Kimmel raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Tough calls. You mean making enemies of everyone, from Canada to China? Tough seems like a pretty nice way of saying reckless. Don't you think Karoline's eyes narrowed, her posture rigid as steel? She wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. I'm not here to explain policy to someone who doesn't understand it. She snapped. You want to talk about reckless? Let's talk about the Obama administration. Let's talk about how they left our borders open, how they let illegal immigration run rampant, and how they never once asked the hard questions about who's coming into this country. The crowd was quiet now, the weight of Karoline's words hanging in the air like an electric charge. Kimmel, however, wasn't backing down. He smirked, eyes gleaming with that familiar Hollywood arrogance. Oh, so now you're going to play the blame Obama card real mature. The man's been out of office for years, and you're still clutching at his shadow to defend your boss's mess. Karoline's chest tightened, but she controlled her breathing. Don't you dare tell me what's mature and what isn't. Jimmy, this is about more than just pointing fingers. It's about a new direction, a new vision, a vision where America leads, not just follows the whims of foreign powers or bends the knee to trade deals that hurt our own people. Kimmel laughed lightly, shaking his head. You keep talking about America first, but let's not pretend that's anything more than a slogan. The reality is, the world is laughing at us. You want to talk about leadership. Try telling that to our allies in Europe, or to Mexico, or to the rest of the world who can't figure out whether we're friends or foes. The audience chuckled, some nodding in agreement, but Karoline could sense a shift. The show was designed to put her on the defensive, to make her feel small, to make her feel like the odd one out. But Karoline wasn't the one who needed to be defensive. She had the truth on her side. They're laughing. Jimmy, Karoline said, her voice cutting through the laughter like a knife. But the truth is, they're scared. They're scared because Trump doesn't play by their rules. He's not afraid to push back, and that's something the world hasn't seen in decades. That's why countries are scrambling to make deals with us. Because we're no longer the ones begging for scraps. We're the ones holding the cards. Kimmel chuckled, though there was an edge to it now. Is that what you think? That the world is scrambling to deal with Trump? Or is it just that no one wants to get stuck in his trade wars? He's been burning bridges faster than a forest fire. At this rate, you'll be left with a lot of empty calls and no one to answer. Karoline leaned forward, her gaze never leaving his. The audience was silent, sensing the tension building between them. You can call it a trade war all you want, Jimmy. But the truth is simple. For too long, the U.S. has been getting the short end of the stick. We've been losing jobs, losing factories, losing respect. But now, we're making them respect us. We're showing the world that we're not a punching bag. And if that means shaking things up, then so be it. Kimmel's grin faltered for a moment, and Karoline could see the cracks in his armor. The laughter, the mockery, it was all starting to feel hollow. And she wasn't done yet. You want to talk about losing, she asked, her voice rising in intensity. Because right now, the only ones losing are the American people, the ones stuck paying the price for endless wars, endless debt, and endless promises that never get fulfilled. While we're over here trying to fix things, trying to make real change, you and your friends in Hollywood just sit back and laugh. You think it's all a joke? Well, maybe it's time you woke up. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The tone had changed, and he knew it. Karoline had taken control of the narrative. For the first time in the show, the crowd was quieter. Kimmel's usual sharp retorts were nowhere to be found. He didn't have an immediate comeback. You're telling me to wake up, Kimmel finally managed. But there was no conviction behind his words. It's you who needs to wake up. Karoline, the world doesn't revolve around Trump's ego. We're talking about people's livelihoods here, people who are suffering because of these reckless decisions. You can't keep spinning this as a victory for America when it's costing the world so much. Karoline stared at him, her face unreadable. The only ones suffering are the people who don't understand what's really happening. You want to blame Trump. But the truth is that he's doing exactly what he promised. He's draining the swamp. He's challenging the status quo. And he's putting America first. So yeah, people are going to be uncomfortable. But that's a small price to pay for real change. There was a beat of silence, a tension in the air so thick that you could almost cut it with a knife. Kimmel, for the first time in the interview, seemed to lose his footing, his usual smirk replaced by a flicker of doubt. Karoline had made her point. The cameras caught every moment, and the audience felt the shift. Karoline wasn't the only one playing in this game. She was dominating it. You keep saying America first, Kimmel said finally, though his voice was more cautious now. But what about the rest of the world? Karoline, what about the people who are being crushed under these policies? Karoline stood tall, her answer unwavering, sharp like a scalpel. America comes first, Jimmy. Because when we're strong, the world is stronger, and that's something no one can deny. The applause was a mix of uneasy claps and forced applause from the crowd. But Karoline didn't care. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to make a point. As the segment drew to a close, the tension in the studio didn't subside. The war of words wasn't over. It was just beginning. The cameras buzzed, the bright studio lights flickering slightly above them. The moment was palpable, an undeniable tension crackling between Karoline and Jimmy. The usual playful banter had been replaced by a palpable fight for control. Karoline could feel the weight of every word, every eye watching her. This was no longer a game. This was about defending her values and everything she stood for. Kimmel, though still maintaining his charm, was visibly rattled. His words were coming quicker, but they lacked the usual bite. Karoline had unsettled him. "Look, Karoline," he started, leaning into the microphone, the smile on his face more of a mask than genuine humor. "You keep talking about putting America first, but you ignore one critical thing. Trump's decisions aren't just hurting the other guys. They're hurting American families. Tariffs, trade wars, sanctions. It's not just abstract policies, it's jobs, it's health care. It's the livelihoods of people in places like Detroit and Akron, and they're being crushed under the weight of it all." Karoline's gaze didn't waver. She stood taller, almost as if feeding off the challenge he presented. "You think those families don't understand the stakes?" "Jimmy," she shot back, "they know better than anyone what it's like to see factories leave, to watch their communities wither because of bad deals and weak leadership. That's the real cost of business as usual in Washington. And that's what Trump is fixing." "But at what cost?" Kimmel retorted sharply. "You're talking about making America great again. But every time Trump makes a decision, every time he pulls that tweet trigger or announces a new policy, people suffer. Not just the other guys, but Americans." Karoline was on the edge now. She didn't need to raise her voice, but her words hit like a punch. "That is exactly what you're missing, Jimmy," she said, the frustration now creeping into her tone. "The problem isn't the policies themselves, it's that we've been feeding off these bad deals for decades. We've been giving away our power. You think China, Russia, Europe, they don't have their own agendas? They've been using us for years. They've been laughing behind our backs while we've been playing nice in the name of diplomacy. Trump is standing up for us, for America." Kimmel raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair, still trying to regain his composure. "So, you think just slapping tariffs on everyone and alienating our allies is the solution? That's your plan. Start a global fight with every country on the planet." Karoline's eyes narrowed. She wasn't going to back down now. "You think diplomacy has worked so well over the last few decades? We've been ignored, laughed at, while others took advantage of us. These tariffs, they're not about starting a fight, Jimmy. They're about leveling the playing field. For too long, America's been paying the price for everyone else's greed." Kimmel scoffed, trying to brush her off, but the audience was feeling the shift. They had sensed her quiet strength, the kind that doesn't flinch when the spotlight is on them. "You're speaking in broad terms, Karoline," he said, voice more defensive now. "But you haven't answered my question. What about the real people, the ones who lose their jobs when companies can't afford those tariffs? What about the families who can't pay their bills because of this America first mentality? Let's talk about those families." "Jimmy," Karoline countered, her voice cold, but undeniably firm. "Because those families are the ones who've been ignored. Those are the ones who were told to sit back and let the government run the show. They've been fed a steady stream of false promises by politicians who never had to worry about a paycheck or a job. You want to talk about people losing their jobs? Try talking to the worker in Ohio who watched their factory shut down while we let China dump cheap goods into our markets. Or the farmer in the Midwest who's watched their livelihoods erode thanks to trade deals that benefited everyone but them. Her words hung in the air, a stark contrast to Kimmel's earlier mockery. She wasn't just defending Trump anymore. She was defending the American people, the ones who felt forgotten and abandoned by the very system Kimmel seemed to champion. The tension thickened, the clash of ideologies becoming undeniable. Jimmy, once quick with his jabs, now found himself on the back foot, his rehearsed lines faltering. Karoline, you can't just keep pointing fingers at China or Obama or whatever scapegoat suits you, Kimmel said, his voice tight. You need to understand that these decisions have consequences here, in our own backyards. This isn't about leveling the playing field. This is about dragging us all into a mess of our own making. Karoline leaned in, her voice dropping to a near whisper. No, Jimmy. This is about protecting us from that mess. Trump may not be perfect, but he's doing something none of your precious career politicians have had the guts to do. He's standing up to the world, and he's standing up for America. The room seemed to hold its breath. The crowd, once divided, was now sensing something more than a typical political argument. This wasn't just about Trump. This was about the future of America itself. And Karoline had become the voice of the forgotten, of the people who were tired of watching their country get walked all over. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably. But there was no denying it, Karoline had the upper hand now. I think we've heard enough of your America First rhetoric, Kimmel said finally, trying to regain control of the narrative. It's time to bring this back to reality. No, Karoline said, her voice firm. It's time you see the reality for what it is. You can keep pretending like the world isn't watching. But the truth is, Jimmy, America is watching. And we're done being told to sit back and wait for things to change. The applause from the audience was subdued but significant. Karoline had done what no one expected. She had pushed back against the narrative that was being built around her. She hadn't just responded to Kimmel's attacks. She had flipped the conversation, bringing it back to the very core of the issue. The stakes were higher now, and the conflict between them was no longer just about Trump's policies. It was about who held the power, the people, or those who sat in ivory towers and dictated from above. Jimmy Kimmel didn't have a snarky retort this time. He was left to process the weight of her words. The game had changed. The battle was far from over. But Karoline Leavitt had made her stand. And it was clear. She wasn't backing down. The audience had gone quiet, a palpable silence hanging in the air. Karoline had landed her punch. But now the room was poised for the next move, the next salvo in this ideological battle. Kimmel, once so sure of himself, was visibly taken aback. Visibly taken. His usually sharp comebacks were now lost in the weight of her words. The shift had been subtle, but undeniable. Karoline had gone from the fiery defender of Trump to a voice for the disenfranchised. And Kimmel had nowhere left to hide. He leaned back in his chair, trying to collect himself, but the moment was slipping from his grasp. The smug grin he wore had faded, replaced by an expression of uncertainty. "All right, Karoline, let's slow down here," he said, his voice strained, trying to regain his footing. "You can't just throw around America First like it's the magic solution to all our problems. It's not that simple." Karoline didn't flinch. She hadn't even broken a sweat. "I'm not throwing it around. Jimmy, I'm living it. And maybe that's the problem here. You think America First is a slogan? But it's not. It's a lifeline for the people who've been ignored, the ones who were left to deal with the fallout of failed policies for decades. While people like you are cozy in your studios, the rest of the country has been fighting for their place in the world." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, eyes locking with his. "The problem is, you're scared. You're scared that the system that's worked for you, that's catered to your worldview, is crumbling, and I get it. No one likes to see their comfortable little world fall apart. But that's what's happening. That's what Trump represents, the shaking of that foundation. Kimmel's jaw clenched. This wasn't going as he expected. You think this is about comfort? About me? He shot back, voice rising slightly. I'm not the one shaking things up for fun. Karoline, people are hurting. Real people. Families. And when Trump makes these decisions, they feel it in their wallets, in their health care, in their lives. You're ignoring the reality that those policies have consequences. Karoline's eyes narrowed, her tone turning steely. And you're ignoring the reality that for years, the people who work hardest, who pay their taxes, who support this country with their sweat, have been getting screwed. And that is what people like you don't get. You can't see past your own bubble. You think the world is this neat, orderly place where everyone plays fair. But out there, in the real world, people are losing jobs, their homes, their dignity. Kimmel's smirk faltered. The cameras flickered in the background as the energy shifted. The audience was starting to lean in, some nodding as Karoline spoke. She wasn't just defending Trump. She was giving voice to a frustration that many felt but had never been able to articulate in front of such a massive audience. You know, it's easy to sit back and critique when you've never had to worry about your next meal or your job security, she continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. But let me tell you, Jimmy, there are millions of Americans right now who are looking for someone who will fight for them, who will stop apologizing for being American and start fixing the damn problems that have been building for decades. Trump didn't create these problems, Jimmy. He's just the one finally trying to fix them. Kimmel opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off. The fire in her eyes was impossible to ignore. You want to talk about consequences. The consequence of doing nothing for so long is the situation we're in now. The working class, the people who make this country run, have been abandoned by politicians from both parties. So, no. I don't care if people like you feel uncomfortable. It's time to shake things up. And if that means standing up to the rest of the world, so be it. The silence in the studio stretched again. But this time, it wasn't a breathless pause. It was a recognition. The audience, the crew, everyone in that room could feel the shift. Karoline wasn't just a political pundit anymore. She was the voice of a movement, a reflection of the people who felt unheard. And now, for the first time in the debate, Kimmel seemed lost for words. He stammered, looking for a way to reassert control. But the sharpness of Karoline's words had cut through his defenses. This wasn't just a debate about Trump's policies anymore. This was a battle of ideologies, of values, and Karoline had made it clear she wasn't backing down. Fine, Karoline, Kimmel said, his voice wavering slightly. You want to keep defending this chaos? Fine. But mark my words, the world won't be so kind to the idea of America first when it burns all its bridges. Karoline gave him a sharp smile, her eyes unwavering. You keep thinking that, Jimmy. Because in the end, it's not about who has the loudest voice. It's about who's fighting for the right cause. And right now, that's Trump. With that, she stood tall, her final words echoing in the air like a declaration. And I'm not done yet. The room was still. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Karoline had said what everyone was thinking, and for the first time, it seemed like the narrative had shifted. She was no longer just a politician or a pundit. She was a symbol for a movement that wasn't afraid to face the hard truths. The audience remained silent, but there was no mistaking the shift in the air. The game had changed, and Karoline had claimed the high ground. The atmosphere in the studio was electric. Karoline Leavitt had just delivered her most cutting, direct speech yet, leaving Jimmy Kimmel and the entire crew speechless. She hadn't just been defending Trump. She had brought the audience into a raw, unfiltered truth about America's struggles, And now, the inevitable confrontation was about to unfold. Kimmel was rattled, but his instincts as a host kicked in. He leaned forward, trying to regain control, though the force of Karoline's words still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. "Karoline," he began, forcing a grin. "You're throwing a lot of blame around, but who exactly do you think is responsible for all of this Trump? The people who voted for him? This country's entire political system didn't break overnight." Karoline didn't flinch. She met his gaze, calm and unwavering. "The system didn't break overnight, Jimmy. It's been broken for decades. The elites in Washington, the people you run with, have been running this country into the ground. Trump might be controversial, but he's doing something that no one else had the guts to do. He's challenging the people who've been profiting from the pain of ordinary Americans." Kimmel shook his head, his frustration starting to show. "So now we're blaming the elites, huh? What about the people who are hurting from these so-called policies? The farmers in Iowa, the families who are losing health care, the teachers who can't get the funding they need for their schools?" His voice raised slightly, an attempt to reclaim the moral high ground. Karoline shot back, her tone ice cold. "Let me make this very clear. Jimmy, you think Trump's policies are the problem, no. The problem is that people like you don't see the everyday struggles of Americans. You're sitting behind your fancy set, throwing around theories, but you don't understand what it's like to have your family's future be dictated by corrupt politicians who don't care about you." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Trump is the first president to fight for these people, the ones who are working 2 jobs, the ones who are still waiting for their shovel-ready jobs to arrive, the ones who don't have the luxury to be outraged by the so-called chaos because they're living it every single day." Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. The studio lights seemed to grow hotter, the silence in the room deafening. For the first time in the entire debate, Kimmel was visibly rattled. His prepared lines felt hollow, like they couldn't stand up to Karoline's unapologetic stance. "You're acting like Trump's chaos is just noise. Jimmy," Karoline continued, her voice firm, "but when the dust settles, you'll see he's the one who is actually listening to the people who have been silenced for too long, and when that happens, you'll be the one left scrambling for an apology." There was no dramatic pause this time. Kimmel was speechless, his expression blank. Karoline had struck a blow that even he couldn't deflect. The finality in the air was heavy. The studio was still, as if the audience was collectively holding their breath. Kimmel's final retort was gone, swallowed by the weight of the moment. Karoline had said what needed to be said. The lines had been drawn. And as she stood there, poised and unwavering, it was clear that the tide was turning. The spotlight was on her now, and there was no going back. The debate was no longer just about Trump. It was about an entire movement that refused to be ignored. The room was electric, almost suffocating with tension. Karoline Leavitt stood, unshaken, as the cameras focused on her. Kimmel, now visibly sweating, realized he had underestimated her. He had expected a political argument, but what Karoline delivered was a battle cry for the forgotten middle class. Kimmel took a deep breath, trying to regain some semblance of control. "So, you're saying Trump's chaos is a necessary evil, that his unpredictability is somehow saving America?" Karoline's eyes narrowed, her voice steady. "Trump isn't chaos, Jimmy. He's the mirror the elites are too afraid to look into. He's everything they hate unpolished, raw, and willing to call out their corruption. And let me tell you, it's working." The audience shifted, their murmurs growing louder. Karoline's words had taken root, and now they were listening intently. Kimmel, on his last legs, tried one final shot. "And you really think people like you, using Trump's name, are going to fix this country?" Karoline's response was simple, but it hit with the force of a freight train. "I'm not using Trump's name, Jimmy. I'm standing for the people who've been used by you and the system you defend. You've failed them for decades, and now it's time someone held you accountable." The lights above flickered, as if the studio itself was reacting. Kimmel, beaten, stood motionless for a moment. The debate had ended. Karoline had won not with theatrics, but with undeniable truth.